happens, the kids are so sensitive and they're so in tune, they can feel that something is off. But when the parent is telling them that no, they're wrong, what that's essentially telling them is that the voice of their body, their intuition, is wrong. And so with time, we learn to trust that less and less and less. So it's this really, really innocent kind of way, but it's like in that way, we become further and further from that voice. And we learn that when that voice comes up, it's really meaningless. Or that it's actually lying. We could even get in trouble if we trust that voice too much. So that's one way that we become disembodied. Another way, so James was talking about what happened when he lost his mom. So when he lost his mom, some huge feelings came up for him. And we experience feelings in the body, not in the head, as we know as human beings. And so when these feelings came up for him, because he didn't know how to process them, because he'd never been taught or had never sat with something that big before, he ended up just cutting off and going to the space of his head and then creating his life from there. And so what happens is oftentimes in our society, we are not taught or kind of encouraged to really express and sit with and process our emotions. So we can imagine from a nervous system perspective that every single emotion that we have is energy in motion. It comes with a charge. So let's say this example is an easy one, so it's kind of extreme, but let's say with fear. Let's say that you get an email that's scary. What will happen then is that you have an emotional charge that will come up. And so in our culture, it will happen usually many times a day where someone will have something stressful that comes up for them and it moves all the way through their body. But because we're in a place now where that threat isn't, what's the word? We don't see it as a real threat. We're not actually doing anything to discharge it. Let me see, that got us a little, there's a better way to explain this. Okay, so emotions come with a charge. So we can imagine that when we have an emotion come up for us, the nervous system releases a charge. And so that's like, we can imagine that we're almost pressing on the gas pedal. So we have fear come up. And so that fear, that charge is moving around the body. If we were in the jungle, what would happen is that we would either fight, run away, or we would freeze and then later tremble. All of these ways would allow us to discharge this emotion. But because we're not in the jungle now, and maybe our fear response is to an email, what happens is that it comes up, we hold, we don't move, and a lot of times we judge ourselves even and say, oh, that's not something worthy of this emotion, or I shouldn't feel that way. And so we don't discharge it. And so with time, what happens is we have these charges that are in our bodies. And so let's say that last week I got really angry about something, but I judged myself, or I just immediately turned to deep breathing without allowing it to move. So I've still got this charge in my body. And then something happens a week later, and I end up, maybe James leaves the cupboard door open. A week later, and I go off on him. And so then I'm like, oh, that didn't even make any sense. And so then he's confused and I'm confused, and probably what will happen is I'll clamp down even harder on my emotions. And so that the next time I might go even longer without an outburst, but this is all still living in the nervous system. And so this disconnects us from our body. When we're not able to express our emotions and allow them to really move through, we get ourselves in a place where the nervous system is dysregulated, and we end up just living in the head because we feel that we can't trust what's happening in the body. Does that make sense? Yeah. I brought you guys on a little tangent there for a moment. My words are strange today, it seems. So that's one thing that's really important, is learning how to sit with those big emotions. And even in this kind of this new age thing, which is wonderful with like high vibing and mantra and meditation, these are wonderful techniques that we both use. But we need to be careful as well that we're not finding ourselves in a situation where maybe we feel angry, instead of immediately turning to deep breath or immediately starting to meditate, allowing that charge to move through. I like to even punch a pillow and really let it out, because we can imagine that, like, if we were in the jungle and something like that came up, all of the energy we would need to fight this thing is coursing through our body. If we don't move at all, or if we don't allow ourselves to really feel it, it's like the gas is on and the brakes are on. And so with time, we're like traumatizing our own body with that. So allowing ourselves to express is a really big deal as well. So those are the two big ways that we become disembodied. And so today we're going to work on 3 ways to become more embodied. So we are going to work with the breath. So James is going to be talking a little bit more about the breath, but the body speaks in the present moment. Whenever we can have awareness of the breath, we come into the present moment, and that makes us available to hear the voice of the body. So we'll be working a little bit with the breath. We'll be doing some yoga asana, so movement. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced, maybe you've gone for a run or after a yoga practice, and all of a sudden maybe you've had kind of an epiphany about something or whatever. Like, it's kind of freeing up the voice of the body when we're able to move a little bit. And so I like to think of my yoga mat as a laboratory for self-exploration. So if we can come to our mat and drop judgment and just be really curious, our body will end up saying so much to us. Just these little sensations, if we can just be present, we can follow even the tiniest sensation. And with time and more practice, we end up hearing things that are quite profound. But we can even just look at like a balancing pose. Let's say that you get into a balancing pose and you're just there with curiosity, and you're just feeling yourself there. And you might notice that this week your balance is a little bit more difficult than it was last week. In that way, you might look off of your mat and see, oh, where in my life am I a little bit out of balance? But just allowing ourselves to be curious and present with our movement. And then our final is with the meditation, and James is going to tell us more about the entrainment.
Cool. So, to start off with, is everybody familiar with the concept that like every part of us, every part of everything is in a constant state of vibration? Yeah? Okay, so with that being the case, the solidity is actually just an artifact of our perception. So everything has space between it, everything is moving and vibrating. When everything is vibrating, it's creating a frequency or sound. So everything has its own frequency, everything creates a sound. So every part of you, every organ, every cell of every organ, your chakras, all of you creates sound. So if anybody here has ever said that they're not creative, it's complete crap, because you're literally a symphony. Like, the music is coming out of you at all times. So I say that for 2 reasons. First is because we're going to be doing some kind of sonic healing type stuff today, and that's one of the kind of the core tenets, is that the vibration of a drum, for example, can work with the vibration of your body and your organs and your chakras. I also say that because Tila touched on this a little bit, but it really works with embodiment. So the vibration of embodiment it's deep, it's low, it's rooted and grounded in the earth. So when we talk about high vibing versus the low vibes, we're actually talking about disharmony. Low vibes are amazing, high vibes are amazing. The high vibes bring us into a spiritual place, the low vibes embody us and bring us into the earth where we want to be as well. So it's really just when there's disharmony, when one chakra isn't in tune with another chakra, and we get that kind of like warbling effect. That's kind of the thing that people talk about, and they talk about it kind of like as low vibing, but it's actually something else. So I like to bring that into this because it's very important that we don't kind of shun those low vibes. It's very important that we let ourselves kind of drop into our bodies and into this kind of wisdom that is within ourselves, and that actually allows us to kind of drop into the earth a bit more too. So we are made of sound, of vibration, but we're also made of rhythm. So we have our breath, we have our heartbeats, and even like the vibration of every cell is its own rhythm. So that's one of the reasons that I personally love the drum so much, is that we can work with these rhythms. So we're going to be doing a few things today. As Tila mentioned, we're going to be doing a movement practice with the yoga asana. As we do that, I'm going to be playing the drum, accompanying it, and kind of working with the energy. So I'm going to be building up the energy as we go. We're kind of going up to a peak, and then when we hit the peak, then we'll let it all kind of wash away with the drum too. But the drum itself, there's nothing really out there, as far as I know, that really makes a person move like a drum. Like, being that we're made of rhythm, rhythm inspires us. It makes us want to move. We've had drums since, well, actually we've been drumming on ourselves even before we could even have the technology to bring a skin around a piece of wood. And even the drum itself, we've found drums that are 37,000 years old. We found flutes that are 60,000 years old. We found percussive instruments that are 160,000 years old. been doing this for a long time, and it's always inspired us, and it's always dropped us into our bodies and allowed us to access that spiritual place. Because as we deepen into ourselves, we grow those roots, we can grow taller into that spirituality as well. So I'm going to be working with the energy, trying to fuse with that. And as you're doing that, you may feel like you want to move, you may feel like you want to be still and kind of absorb it, and that's completely fine. As we kind of went over in the beginning of this workshop, I want you guys to do whatever your body is telling you that you want to do. Actually another thing that I'll be doing then is the breath, and Tila touched on this for a moment, but when we bring consciousness to the breath, it allows us to come into the present moment, which allows us to hear the body more. So when I hit the low note of the drum, that's going to be a signal to breathe. Now in the beginning, we're going to be breathing together. So it'll be very clear, we'll inhale and we'll exhale, and we'll get that rhythm going. But as we start building up the pace, our breath is probably going to go off a little bit, breathing harder and that kind of thing. And that's completely okay. This is going to keep going, but it's just going to serve as kind of a guidepost to remind you to bring consciousness to the breath. You don't need to remember to inhale or exhale with this specifically. So that brings us to the third thing that we're going to be doing today to give you that felt sense of embodiment, and that is meditation. So meditation is a practice that can take quite a long time to master. But when we use the drum, it gives us kind of a cheat. We get to drop into it and get a sense of it. And when we kind of are able to do that more often, the more we do it, the more easily we drop back into it later. So we're going to be doing something called entrainment. Entrainment is a natural process by which two cycles or rhythms or frequencies come into sync with each other. It was discovered by a guy who had a clock shop, of all things, and he came in, got the pendulum swinging one night, left, came back the next day, and all the pendulums were going in sync. And turned out that when there are cycles or frequencies, rhythms within a certain proximity, they have an energetic exchange. So when they're out of sync with each other, they create negative feedback until they're both going together. So we can see this, if you've ever been jet lagged, it's because you're entrained to one day and night cycle, you're going to another day and night cycle, so your body has to re-entrain with that. Or if we've all, so women, when you live together with a group of women, your menstrual cycles can link up. That's the same thing, that's entrainment. We're being entrained to each other. We see it all over the place. What we're doing today is we're actually entraining the brain waves to the beat of the drum. So so right now we're probably almost kind of called a beta state. It's the working state. It's multitasking, doing. There's also an alpha state, a theta state, and a delta state. So what we're trying to do is play the drum at about 220 beats per minute for an extended period of time, so that it entrains with that negative feedback your brain waves. So it goes from beta down to alpha and then down to theta. Theta is the meditative place. It's also the place of vision, journeying. So this is actually, when we think of like shamans, we often think of like plant medicine, which is one part of their practice, but at the root of shamanism is the drum. And it's actually, when we're doing like journeying practices, when shamans do journeying practices, it centers around the drum in order to change the mind state. What we're doing now is not really trying to get into a journey state, we're trying to get into the meditative, so we're creating kind of a different container around it, but we're actually tapping into something very ancient and doing something very similar to what the shamans would do. So that's kind of the basics of it. We're trying to get into a meditative state with the drum. So what to expect? So this will be the final Shavasana. We'll be doing it for about half an hour. So just get comfortable, put your cushions where you want to, put a blanket over if you want to. If you feel comfortable doing it, close your eyes, because that can really help. When the drum starts, it can be a little jarring. It's a very fast, very loud, repetitive rhythm. So it might be kind of annoying even. You might just not want it to happen. But the best thing to do is just kind of ease into it. Just let it happen. Try not to fight it. If you can't stop fighting it, that's fine, and that'll be the perfect experience for you. But the more you kind of ease into it, the easier it'll be. Some people will go into kind of a blank meditative space. Some people will fall asleep, which is totally fine. I won't be offended at all by that. That's a great place to go. Some people will go into kind of a visionary state. They'll see colors or images. They might hear things that they don't think could be happening in this space. Then there's also the journeying space, so you might kind of see a lot more than just images. And then this is uncommon, but it is possible, there have been out-of-body experiences as well. So if any of those things are uncomfortable for you, you don't want to be experiencing those things, all you have to do is raise your hand and Tila's gonna come over and she'll be able to ground you back in to make you feel comfortable. So you don't need to worry about any of that, and we're creating a very safe container around this, so whatever the experience is gonna be the perfect experience for you. It can be kind of timeless, so you don't need to worry about like whether we're going over time or anything like that. What I do is a shamanic callback at the end, which will let you know very clearly that this is the end of it, and now it's going to be time to come back. So it's 4 sets of 7 beats, followed by a roll, and 4 sets of 7 beats. And the first of that is to let you know that we're coming to a close. The second is to let you know that we're ending it, and then the third is to kind of that we're done. So that's in keeping with shamanic practices. Also, Tila's gonna be going around doing Reiki during that, so if you feel her presence, that's all that is. Anything you wanna share about that?
I want to just mention that with the practice today, the yoga asana and the Reiki, I will not be doing any hands-on adjustments or anything like that. The Reiki will also be hands-off. So I won't be touching anyone at any point in this practice today, with the exception, if you're feeling uncomfortable during the entrainment and you raise your hand, I may then ask if I can place my hands on your shoulders to help ground you. But other than that, I want everybody to know that when we go into the final Shavasana, because we will have our eyes closed and we will dim the lights a bit, that nobody will be coming around and touching you or anything, so that everybody can really relax into that. Just another reminder, because I know that everybody came here with different curiosities and things. If at any time during the vinyasa flow that we're gonna do, you feel like just hanging out and listening to James play the drum, that is absolutely fine. So I want to encourage everyone, this is my first time with most of you guiding this practice. And so you're always gonna know your body way more than the teacher does, but especially in a circumstance like this, I'm gonna be doing sequences that you may not like, and that's totally fine. If you just take a seat or do whatever you want to do, that's going to be perfect for me. And I think, and the last thing I always like to mention, if during the entrainment, how James says sometimes it can be a little bit like, for me when I first began working with the entrainment, it was a little bit, what's the word? Not annoying, but like I could feel it, and I could definitely feel it here in my head, like here in the front part of my head, my forehead. So it could be helpful to, if you're feeling in the entrainment anything feels a little bit off, to kind of create some space between the eyebrows. So what?
Discordant?
Yes, something like that, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So relaxing the space between the eyebrows, and I'll give you guys that cue again, but just to, that came up for me when you were talking, so I thought I would mention it. So.
Emotional releases can also happen during this,
Oh,
which is a
good one.
beautiful and amazing thing that we definitely encourage. So